little my. Welcome to Speak Sex. I'm your host, Eurydice, and today we're going to talk about conscious uncoupling, the gifts and the empowerment that comes from breakups, which seems counterintuitive, but is super intuitive, and that's why our guest is an intuitive leader. She runs the School of Intuitive Yoga here in Miami, and she's in general a conscious event leader. She also runs events called the Human Experience, the Human Connection Experience. I met her when I attended one of them, and I can say that the main the main thing was, I don't know, about hugging like 100 people in an hour is how I can summarize it. So Kara Baruzzini, welcome to the show, Kara.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Finally.
I know. We started this process with Kara and her partner coming on. I invited them to come on and speak about conscious partnership, conscious union, and then in the process they uncoupled, and we talked through. Kara and I discussed it. In the course of like months, right? It's almost a year, I think. You were
almost
scheduled to come,
year.
Yeah, nearly a year ago. And so I have had the privilege of listening and witnessing your very, I think well articulated, research and understanding of your own emotional, process. And I think it's invaluable because, just like sex, it's one of these things we don't have words about, right? And it's kind of like, the darkness, the bad news, yeah, the shame, so the failure, whatever. So all of that social conditioning that we've been handed, from our ancestors who also didn't have the words. So we're trying to change that. So thank you for coming on, and thank you for being open. It's not easy. It's not, and being kind of willing to tell us this narrative, the narrative of loss and disappointment and rage that we've all gone through, and we will again and again. This most human of all stories, of falling in love and falling out of love, and yeah.
Wow. I'm reflecting now with you saying all this. You went through that entire journey with me. I totally forgot.
Yeah.
You went through the whole journey of me being so in love when we were going to come on together, and
we talked about that episode, and
we were prepared, and then it just, in that moment, it was it didn't last much longer, and and wow, you got the play-by-play. You saw me avoiding this moment for so long.
Yeah.
For our listeners, I was not ready to do this call for so long. I don't even think I'm still ready.
Yeah, I know. You tried today to get out of it.
I try every single time we had a date. I was I'm getting out of this crap.
Yeah.
I think I still have to kind of shake the nervousness off right now to talk about this topic, because it really is it's so vulnerable. And I'm still in it. We're always still in it. It's it really is a never ending process. So yes, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the nervousness. I'm feeling all the feelings right now, and I'm not really sure what's going to come of this, but I sat here before we got on this call, and I was like, you know what, universe, just let the right words that someone needs to hear out there, just let them come through me.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start. I don't know where to begin.
But well, we'll start together. Yeah. I mean, I feel that, it's really all about how we see it, right? It's all how we we experience something. So it's all about the work that goes on in our heads. The reason that I have really wanted to have you on and have you on when you're still vulnerable, not when you have moved on, which is really important, not when you have made history out of it and told the narrative to yourself or others enough times that it becomes like a story, but while you're still like writing the story, is exactly that. That's where our agency comes in. But we're so, overawed with emotion at that time that it's really hard, to move into a place of reason, right? So we kind of like let emotional language, which is instinctive, what we call instinct language, to kind of tell the story to us, to our mind, to our reason. And yet there is no instinct language. It's just what we call emotion is exactly all the stuff that we have inherited by watching it rather than verbalizing it, by seeing our parents or our friends or the people on TV or like the books we read or whatever behave in similar, circumstances, and reading or hearing what they felt. So then that tells us how we feel, right? So that's, and I feel that love belongs to emotion, clearly. and it's a place of, love is like a leap of faith, right? So the loss of it becomes very much kind of like a betrayal or a judgment on oneself for having made that leap, and we forget that when we make that leap of faith, it's 100% from the heart. It's not it's not so much with our minds. If it is, it won't hurt that much. Mm-hmm. So, it's again a process of the heart to accept, what is and take it as a strength, a growth, an enrichment, an empowerment, an expansion, rather than a loss, a break, broken heart, a damage, a scar. And I think like nowadays we tend to talk a lot about scars, and wounds, psychic wounds, and that's just the language of therapy. But it's good to remember that these things are not that unusual. This is, it's pretty normative. So it's not like, you had, let's say, cancer or a very traumatic car accident. I mean, 50% of marriages fail, 60% of second marriages fail, 70% of third marriages fail, and you guys were just a couple. You didn't even become engaged, right? So it's more like the idea we have in our heads of like success means like everlasting. And it's a flawed ideal. It's just not, humanly possible without outside enforcement, like divorce is illegal, so our ancestors had no choice when you can't, right? But that's what I mean, so we get to grow and learn from it, but still we are going by the stories that we inherited from previous generations that really, generations that really had no options, where women especially, right, who didn't have like property rights or rights to their children, had no options. So it's like the weight and the length of that inheritance, like 5,000 years, right, versus like your, 30 years alive, if that. So it's I think that's where the burden of the work that you're doing comes in. You're pushing back like all those centuries in order to try and hear like your own new voice and understand it for yourself.
If there's one thing that the separation has taught me, it's just to fall in love with that life-death life nature. Something has to die. So there has to be the destructive force in order for something new to grow. And so I've actually found a way in this process to actually celebrate endings and celebrate the destructive force and allow myself to go into that darkness and nurture there. The way that I grew up, I love what you're talking about with conditioning, because the way that I grew up, I watched my parents go through a brutal divorce. It was so loud, and there was so much fighting, there was so much drama, and there was many, many, many years of that suppressed on my conscience. I don't think the drama from that divorce is, even to this day, still, it's not over. Wow. And so the story that I made about...
How many years, I'm sorry, just to get there. Yeah. How many years were they in that, kind of like angry recrimination drama of the,
Oh my gosh.
The breakup or the betrayal of the divorce, the lawsuits.
Yeah, I can recall probably a solid 5 years of just absolute like turmoil in the household over that breakup. And it really was like the word break, like to break up. It really was that. It was a break. Like I was constantly told that ruined our family, that breaks up a family, that literal breaking of like household items was happening all the time. Like I remember like the walls breaking and things being thrown and broken. So breakup was, to me, it was a very harsh thing. I was very conditioned to think that was the worst thing that could happen. It was like the ending, and there was no beginning that came after. So towards the end of my last relationship, we sat there, and to me, something just didn't quite feel right anymore. So when we decided to uncouple and do it in a conscious way, I had to like totally, completely make up this new way of thinking.
Right. So, yeah, because so that's what it is, it's like your first response is the one you've learned.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that first response is not our own. It's the second response. If we stay with it long enough, that is our own, and that's the rewrite. So, for our listeners, like if there is like a rule of thumb, I would say that's the basic rule of thumb. The immediate reactivity, what we call reactivity, right? The reaction, what you do without thinking, how you feel, all of that, the very strong response is what we've seen. I mean, if in your formative years you watched your mom feel existentially threatened by her breakup, if her entire identity as a human being was invested in that marriage, and without it she felt like she couldn't be or wasn't who she knew herself to be, then you saw that's what you learned. That's what you understood. Doesn't matter, what we tell ourselves. Like you could go to school and study psychology and, read about feminism and march in the streets and ask for, equal pay. But when you live that same experience, the only, your system, right, of understanding comes from what you witnessed as a child.
Yeah, it's taking right now constant rewriting of that story, constant, all the time. I forget all the time that what I did and what we did together was actually very constructive. We decided to let go of something that was not working, that was not of the highest good for this entire planet, nor was it of the highest good for us. And there's a lot of benefits on the other side of that. but you usually have to go through those destructive forces first, which is not easy. And a lot of the destructive forces is that rewriting of the story of what, as a society, we believe that separations are, when we have the potential here to rewrite that story and actually celebrate endings, celebrate the courage it takes to say goodbye, celebrate the courage that it takes to say, this is no longer working for us, celebrate the courage that it takes to say, this is no longer of highest good for us, nor is it for the planet, and rewrite something new.
Yeah. I think that it's harder for women than men, or for, let's say, female gendered people. My personal understanding of the reason is that women are family based. They make the children, they create the children, and they nourish and nurse. So they are hormonally programmed to create family, to create stability, to bring together numbers of people, of human beings who didn't exist before, and make them into human beings. That's our greatest work and labor, right? And the way that the patriarchy kind of legislated the right of men to own and control those children, was to keep women bound to men, each woman to, like, let's say, her rightful owner, who was also her beloved, which complicates things. And and he, that way, would guarantee that he was the father, because she had no other man could have access to her body, basically. So, and it was all about, like, the progeny. So, but biologically, from the reproductive sense, men were not supposed to do that. Men were supposed to, like, hunt and gather and fight the wars and just basically inseminate as many women as possible. That's why they can still have a baby at, like, 90, right? So they were not supposed to stay there and be present and, like, see this through to like, the child's whatever 20s. This has evolved this way, basically, out of patriarchy, which began as a way for men to be able to, like, control their generational wealth, and their progeny, because naturally, as human beings, we want to invest in the future, all of us. So what I'm saying is, there are, like, thousands of years of women where women have sacrificed everything to keep the family together. And they had no choice, So the sanctity of the family unit has, fallen on women, because men could, go out to work and kind of, like, be away from home and not deal with the domesticity so much, or maybe have a mistress or 2 or 10 or whatever, They had many more rights of freedom and property and ownership for thousands of years. So women kind of, like, in time, willingly took it upon themselves to, like, keep the family unit together. And so we have come to confuse our, duties and responsibilities and also, like, biological impulses toward their children with those that we feel toward our, mates, because we have been sure that we should be mating for life, which just doesn't happen anymore. And now we have, like, paternity tests, and we have in vitro, and we have sperm banks. And so, like, practically speaking, that whole system is obsolete. But emotionally speaking, we're in it. That's the only logic we know.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. And I also want to talk about the benefits it is about being a woman in this experience too, because women are so nurturing. My experience going through this was, yes, I resonate with everything that you said. It's definitely in my DNA. It's like ancestral trauma passed down through lineage. I got to face all of that. It was like definitely fighting a war sometimes. And I had the most beautiful experience being a woman in this situation because I have the most incredible girlfriends, and like guys are probably not doing this. What happened the day after the uncoupling? I showed up to my friend's house, and they had made a bed on the floor with rose petals everywhere. And they made me dinner, and they laid me down on this bed of rose petals, and they let me cry, and they rubbed roses all over me, and they massaged my head and my feet and my hair. And I was like, oh my God, this is what being in love feels like. Like so many emotions like running through my body, and I'm just being held and loved by two of my best friends. And you know what? That is the feminine rising, and that is like the 20s.
Yes.
I swear. That is the 20s, so right there.
Yeah.
As the, that it's so old earth, the patriarchy and everything that has suppressed us into. And now it's like on the other side of that, women are supporting women. And I don't think that men get that same experience these days where, the next day when I really needed that, my friends, they didn't even tell me a thing. They just set this up. And it was like a freaking miracle to me in that moment.
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea and suggestion, to do for each other, because it creates ritual. And ritual is what we do when we want to normalize something. Is this is a ritual event, like a relationship comes to its assumed or expected completion. We don't think that way, but when we ritualize it, and then the other thing you said about how it's very much, a part of like the seasons, nature, where like you fall in love in spring and you complete it in winter, on the darkest night, the birth, rebirth and seasonal death, that happens. How empowering would that be if we would begin to understand relationships, and love that way, in a seasonal way, instead of,
absolutely,
this idea of the vow, which again, began the everlasting kind of like assumption begins specifically with women's like chastity vow and marital vow, and it's only interested in paternity, right? It's only interested in controlling the actual, like, so when you're on birth control, it's ridiculous that you even are thinking that way, but we don't go through it and reason our way through it ever, right? But that was the only purpose for it, was to make sure that there was clear paternity and hereditary lineage. And, again, as women, we have to remember that in that lineage, the female children were useless, right? They were the empty vessels, so they would sell them to the fathers of grooms, or to grooms, as young as it was allowed, basically, and get back like dowry. And they were interested in the male children. So that's how that system, to which we're so faithful, because we're just faithful creatures, began. That was like the reasoning behind our expectation of like lifelong, mating commitment. And yet every story, every romantic comedy, every romance novel, there is always that line, they lived happily ever after, minus the details.
Yeah. And one of my favorite authors, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, she's the writer of Women That Run with the Wolves. She's the one who has the idea of the life, death, life, nature. And she says that in every relationship, there is always the life, death, life, nature. If the relationship has to continuously go through that cycle, it must die and come back to life again and again and again, or else we just start to flatline. So we have to constantly be going through these waves of ups and downs in the creative force and the destructive force. So Even if a relationship doesn't end in the moment that it meets its death, it must die and recreate itself. I don't know that there's any happily ever after, like the movies have told us that they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's constantly dying and coming back to life. And until we learn as a society to fall in love with that process, life on this planet is just going to be really hard.
Yeah, hard and confusing and way too dramatic.
So here's to the feminine rising, where we can actually learn to surf on top of those waves and learn to love the highs and the lows.
When we think about it in those terms, every time that you renegotiate the contract of the marriage or the relationship, or like our grandparents renewing their vows, it's like ways of confirming exactly that. It goes through cycles. And also usually, one of the two has to make a sacrifice for that to happen, and that's what we can equate with like the dying, one of the two or both like go through the process of giving something up, and that is a spiritual death of some kind, and commit a little deeper or a little somehow, differently for the relationship to go on. But again, if you remove from love the kind of like the transactional aspect of it, the materiality of it, which happens really hardcore when the woman gets pregnant and gives birth. And until then, really, it doesn't so much, exist unless the woman is there primarily to like get some, become pregnant and get married by this person for transactional reasons. But if you remove that, then it's not needed. The hold is, I would say, primarily financial, because once you have children, you start, worrying about your and their like financial well-being if you don't have like the legally sanctioned, providing. and then, but it's also like moral, because I think that our society, judges women traditionally, at least, again, the old society, right? The old world, the old nature of things, judged women who came out of relationships much more harshly, than men, because a boy or a guy would be like, wow, he has like 10 girlfriends, he like changes women like shirts, he has a girl in every harbor. I don't know, there are numerous like expressions of empowerment, for the male gender, through at least, history, as written history that we have, right? Whereas the same is not at all, for women. Like, men are empowered to like impregnate and spread their semen as much as possible, but women are loose and right, and they are like bad if they can't like hold on to their men or if they go from men to men, and just basically the narrative is very different. If it's not empowering for a woman to be impregnated by many men, for sure. No. Yeah. That is a lot of moral negative judgment, So it's very unequal how our loyalty is judged, our loyalty in relationships. So being conscious of that too is important when we feel like we failed, right? Rather than the relationship completed. Word. So what were the signs that when you knew that it was time to uncouple? Let's start with that. Without, if there were signs without drama.
Yeah. So there wasn't much drama. If anyone knows the man I used to be in a relationship with.
I do. That's why I assumed there is no drama. Yeah.
There's not too much drama. It just started to become this feeling, this intuitive feeling. It was like, for me, there was nothing wrong. Something just wasn't quite right. I personally, I'll speak just from the way that I felt, because it's my perspective here. I felt I felt really just so comfortable. You know, they said people would go into quarantine as relationships and it would kind of like make or break the relationship. We got it. For me, I felt so comfortable, and it was like this stagnant, comfortable, like I wasn't doing things outside of the relationship. I wasn't creating things outside of it. It just was like this feeling of being stuck, and I couldn't move. And I just said to him one day in the kitchen that I wonder if we need to talk about going separate directions, maybe for a little while. That was how it started at first. And there was nothing drastic that happened. It was just a quiet, intuitive voice, and I listened to it. So that was how we knew.
And he said what? He said, yes, let's, or? He
said, if I recall correctly, he said, yeah, I feel it too. I think we were both, it was almost like, on the Indian New Year, they tie a red thread around everyone's wrist, and you're not supposed to take the red thread off until it kind of just like falls away. That's how it was with us. It was like, it was not cut. It was not like ripped off. It was just, it really gently fell away. Which, backstory on us, we had broken up for 6 months. We were together 3 years in total, and we had broken up 6 months right in between, which was it was the opposite of a conscious separation. It was like abrupt, and it was just like some parties felt like they were left with like no say in it, and there was this lingering feeling for the entire 6 months that something wasn't complete. It was like we constantly had this cord, this energy connected to each other, and naturally we got back together. And now looking back, it makes so much sense to me why we got back together, because something really was abruptly cut off, and we did not live that relationship all the way through. This time it was like we lived it all the way through, and the second that red thread fell off my wrist, I was like, okay, this is where it became really conscious. We're like, okay, let's shine some light on this. We wrote journal prompts. These are all of our journal prompts for the week. We took an entire month to make sure that that's actually what we wanted to do. And as we're going through this process, our relationship was starting to light up again for me. And I was like, wow, one of two things is going to happen here. We're definitely having a death right now. We're definitely going through a destructive force. We're definitely either going to end this and start a whole new vibrant life, or we're going to let this die and we're going to come back to life together in such an incredible way. And I think that's how you know you're doing something from the heart. The relationship starts lighting up again, and you start talking about things, and you start being real, and the walls start coming down, and there starts to be real intimacy. And it was an absolutely beautiful process at the end. And as we continued to talk about it, we did realize that we were just different people that wanted different things, and we lived it all the way through, right to the very end. We said all the things that we needed to say. We like held containers to just like be angry and be sad and like ugly cry, and whatever it was, we just let ourselves feel it in that last month. And we made sure that everything was complete, that if there was any open wound, it was complete. We gave an offering to the ocean. It was a really beautiful ceremony. And it was, the whole process of that last month together, for me, it was actually really fun. And it was exploring in like a new form of the relationship that I had never done in my entire life with anyone. I remember this day we met up and we had this like business meeting. It was like, there's like a business meeting to close out our business. That was our relationship. And we were like, okay, how are we going to handle if we see each other at an event? How are we going to handle that? And we left all the group chats that we were in together, and we blocked each other on Instagram and social media because we just wanted to make sure there was that healthy space. And we made an agreement that we would not talk. We would not reach out. We would not send a message unless we really had to before a certain date. And that was really cool. So we had our medicine woman, we had our business meeting, and then we planned for the very last day of our relationship a closing ceremony. So we went out onto the beach and we made an altar, and we brought some fruit, and we brought an offering for the ocean. And I think it's what we did at the closing ceremony was we shared what did we gain in the relationship? What are we taking with us that was valuable? And then we shared, first we shared, what is it that was there anything left that we needed to say? Is there anything else that we need to clear? Of course, there is always something. And then after it was, what are we taking away? What are we grateful for? And then we acknowledged each other. That was the last part. We acknowledged each other. He gave me affirmations. I gave him affirmations, and we thanked each other so much for that time. And we gave an offering to the ocean. And I remember that last hug was like, we had no shell at all. It was just pure love. I don't think we had ever stood in each other's presence in so much love. It was the realest moment I think we've ever had together. And what I realize is, you access a lot of love in relationships, and there is no love greater than the love and the strength that it takes to say goodbye.
I agree. Because that's when you're most selfless, and that's where all the huge, construct of expectations is gone. And so what you feel then, if you still love and honor, that's just pure love.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The love that it takes to let go is the greatest love that you can ever access. I'm so sure of that. And I left the beach that day, and I went back to my friend's house. I had moved out with him. I've moved out of his space, and I was staying with a friend, and I went and when I got to her house, she had just started a relationship container with a new man, and she was so in love, and she had this sparkle of love in her eyes. And I walked in, and I had just uncoupled officially, and she knew, and we looked at each other, and we just held each other and melted into the middle of her floor and ended up in this cuddle puddle. And I was like, I am so in love with life right now. I felt so alive. I felt so in my body. I felt so rooted and grounded in this life force energy. It was incredible. And she was feeling that exact same thing. And we met in the middle and melted on the floor in this puddle of love. And it was coming from two different places, her starting something new and me ending something. And the way that it could just coexist there was so beautiful, and something that I never thought was possible. I thought, being in my shoes, I really, in the past, old me would have maybe been a little jealous, oh, here she is starting a new relationship, all of the forces. Yeah, all of the forces, they just really are love. And in that moment, I entered into my darkness. I entered into 3 months of a very, very dark place. And there was so much love that existed in the darkness. This is another thing that I'm doing, is deconditioning that darkness is bad, because it's not bad at all. It's extremely nurturing. It's the feminine. It's like going back into the womb where you can recreate yourself. It's just, I was very quiet for a long time. You were trying to get me to do this podcast, and I was like, next week, because I literally didn't have a voice. I was so deep in the womb. Nothing was coming out of me. I just needed to nurture what I was sitting with. A lot of my demons came up in that time, and it was actually very, very beautiful, and like coexisting right alongside my friends who were in the creative force, and they're making amazing things. And for the first time in my life, I think there was no jealousy. It was just like, we are where we are, and it feels good.
Oh yeah, that's it. I love that, the way of that's how I say it to myself too, and it helps me, because again, we don't have like better words for it. So as much as I believe that it's all a continuum, I too say old me, new me, because then I kind of like understand clearly the distance I've traveled from what I have been taught to what I'm actually doing. So yeah, I definitely understand that that process. And also, we're so much in our masculine in daily life in America. When you said like they were creating and they were succeeding, but the feminine is the darkness very comfortably. It's when we rest, it's when we process, it's when we re-articulate, those 9 months of carrying a child to term, which are so like formative for our gender, for the female sexed peoples, are very much that process. You take a break, you put the life of the fetus to be a newborn first, you learn that type of love that is the love that then you can use in your life as a woman for all kinds of other purposes, like letting go, which again, a mother lets go of the child she's nourished after, whether it's 15 years or 20 years or whatever it is. It's the same kind of like finding natural closure, through like an abundance of loving. But to get to that wisdom, we have to take a little step out of the masculine, go, produce, how much did you make today? Take a step out of it, and understand that our value cannot simply be judged by the ways of judging, boy value. Part of being feminists has to be, like respecting and honoring who we are as women, and not just constantly like trying to, catch up and compare ourselves to, men in the production system, which is like the stage, of our society right now, because our value is different and greater, different in the sense of greater. Our value is that we can do more or less what, a man can do, but we, in addition to that, can do all this other work, of like nourishing life, labor, so, that's the stuff that we access, I think, when we enter the darkness, right?
And you talk about old me would have powered through this and just like kept trying to go up and up and up and up, and would have totally missed out on that opportunity of going down into the darkness and going down and into the feminine stage there, which I think a lot of us in society right now, because it is so like masculine dominated.
Quarantine is very feminine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank God for quarantine. Seriously. If I did not, I think it was the first time in my whole life I really let myself go down, like, and into the womb, into the darkness, and really stay there. I did the bare minimum. I was like, okay, what's the minimum that I have to do here to like pay my bills and survive? I'm going to do just that and nothing else. And it was so perfect for me because I just needed that time to totally fully go in. And let me tell you, it's like the deeper you allow yourself to go down and in to the darkness and like have a little tea party with your demons down there and look them lovingly in the eyes, the brighter it is on the other side. So I felt like I was going through this dark tunnel all this time, and I'm finally seeing the other side, and I am so much more powerful right now than I ever thought possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
My creative force is so on its A game. I'm creating things bigger than I've ever done. I'm surprising myself. I'm doing them with effortless ease.
I don't think I've shared it in like the almost 3 years of doing this podcast. But I was very much, a version of my process. And I was with a partner for 7 years. And I reached the stage that you say with the red thread. I think I reached it a couple of times. But each time, but for me, I felt my biological imperative very clearly. And yet I lived in a very adult world. None of my girlfriends had children. He and I were not married, and I wasn't like looking for to settle down. I wrote at the time for Spin magazine, and I went on assignments. I traveled around the country and stayed in communities and with different people and wrote investigative articles about them, their lifestyles, right? So none of it was really conducive. We lived in the West Village, but I felt it very strongly and had that conversation with him a few times, and he was always saying, yes, we'll get there. We'll buy a house. I remember buy a house in the Poconos, and have a baby. But it was just talk, and I just was. It was so. Again, biological for me, but I was open to it. I felt like everything around me is telling me, ignore the fact that you're a girl. Just ignore it, because you're going to be a loser, right? You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose I had a book deal with Simon & Schuster. I had an agent. They want me to write another book. I had, so I was about to write the second book of that deal. So basically, I had I taught at the Ivy League, right? I had a certain life. And in order to keep up with the boys at the time, the boys writing for Spin, right? Or I could not also give birth and raise the child the way I would want to. I could perhaps, if I had if I decided to marry and have a husband of means, maybe, kind of pass on the raising of my child to childcare or foreign nannies or something, but then that's not what I would want to do. I wouldn't want to go through giving a year of my life to this amazing process and not be present every moment of her day. Turned out she was a girl. To experience and learn from this, right? So in a way, I made that extraordinary choice step by step. I first bought a condo here in Miami Beach while we still lived, in New York with the book advance. So, I was taking these steps, and then I did a ritual by the ocean, a fertility ritual with my girlfriend, and literally the first time that I, was sexual, I believe, first, you never know exactly, but first or second, after the ritual, which we did on the in the Aegean Sea, I conceived, not by my partner, and that kind of set, a whole other series in motion. My partner wanted to be the father, nevertheless, and participate, but by then, I felt like it was too late, yeah. So I felt what you said, that we had the thread had naturally fallen off, in a sense. And a new relationship was about to start with the natural father. But more to the point, it was the system that feminism has given us, and thank God for our mothers and their struggles, right, and for feminism, because we have this option and we didn't before. But still, now that we have it, and now that we're in it, and now that we can give verbal consent, and now that we've legally achieved so much, like including marital rape, which was inconceivable like a generation ago, rape within a marriage. So now that we're here, we gotta open up space for us to also be women and mothers, again, from a place of value and empowerment, like, in the open, so that calling doesn't have to compete with our calling for further career acknowledgement or for success in the world of like in the marketplace, which is the world of like men and women as equals, right? So I found myself extremely creative in a new way, and that's how I started doing my art. And I learned something which is very interesting, because I think it is happening very much in the economy right now around us. I learned that I could name a price for the things that I was creating, and people around them would buy them without needing the approval of a system, which is what I had done up to then. Up to then, like, I got the many university degrees, and then I taught at the university. So I had the system behind me, or I worked for the magazine, I worked for them, and then my writing had value because of that. This, I just opened an art studio in the middle of the city.
Wow.
And people bought without knowing anything other than they liked the artwork, right? So, and I think that's very much what's happening nowadays with like coaching, or like the medicine woman you mentioned, where women like get this knowledge and then turn around and share it with other women, and the women who receive it think that this is worth money, and they pay them for it. So there are all these kind of like careers that we're making up that are not in the centralized marketplace, in the centralized system of work for money.
Oh yeah.
Right?
It's becoming, I think this is a huge part of the future spiritual economy, is that more and more people are going to start to be paid for their insights. And that's, that was huge for me in my process of darkness, because I hired someone who she does family constellations, and I was planning on doing maybe a month with her. And then after a month, I was like, I have to keep this going. She completely taught me how to reparent myself. And it's a huge, huge part of all of those ritual, like you said, ritualizing the closing ceremonies, and like hiring the medicine woman. It's so a part of people supporting each other and lifting each other up, and like allowing each other to sit in that darkness and just feel for as long as it takes, because it sounds like also for you found the miracles on the other side of the darkness. There is that on the other side of the darkness. There's an even bigger creative wave, which you found in such a beautifully physical, biochemical ways. You said you conceived your daughter.
Right, exactly.
Right, yeah. On the other side of that.
Exactly. And then, that's what I'm saying, so then, I do think that this process is something that we can make more kind of like institutionalized. I don't know if that's a very strong word, but, something that women are aware of, that modern feminist, young women are aware of this as a valid option, because the way that we understand work now we get, we get like accreditation and like, raises by this like corporate state that we live in, right? So it's, in one way or another, we also are trying to like climb the corporate ladder, it doesn't matter if we work for a corporation per se, it's the structure, it's a similar structure, like of a pyramid. Institutionalize it so it's a legitimate and an honored choice, for women to make, to create career and create work based on the choices that you just described, coming out of the darkness and the lessons and wanting to share those and wanting to share like the wisdom of intuition, which, for you, like you already were before in the human connection. So I think it's just growing, you're very articulate when it comes to the world of emotion.
Thank you. Yeah. I think after going through this whole experience, one of the best words of advice that I could give to someone is to hire a healer, and that you don't have to do this stuff alone. And if you can't hire a healer, because I know not everyone can, asking for support and telling people how you need to be supported is huge. Like I during my time of going through that darkness that we talk about, I asked my best friend, will you just spoon me for 2 hours? And she was honored to do that. And we did just that. Like, I just needed to be held for 2 hours. We don't have to go through our process alone at all. We can always ask. And chances are when you ask, it's a lot of times an honor for someone else to be there for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. And again, that's the gift of the feminine. Yeah. You don't have
it
to,
is.
We don't have to like soldier on. There is no implication, the implication is not that you couldn't survive on your own. The implication is that you trust, that you trust her to honor your process, and that you will by default, be there for her if she needs the same at some point in her life.
Yes, of course, we always want to feel safe with ourselves, and self-nurturing. I'm such a big fan of it. Like giving yourself a hug. I have done that so many times when I'm just feeling down, giving yourself a hug, or like knowing techniques to just like get stagnant emotions up and out of the body, like shaking your hands, like I was doing at the beginning of this call with my nervousness, just like shaking things out. But also one of there's many tools, and people just have to find what works for them. Like when the emotions arise, what do you reach for? For me, it really was a self hug. It was shaking it out, or it was like, I'm just going to give myself permission to lay in bed all day and cry.
Yeah, but that's beautiful too. I just want to say that
absolutely.
Is beautiful, and it's not, you don't have to rush into some sort of like therapeutic mumbo jumbo and say, oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I need to be medicated because like I don't want to go to work. It's just a natural part of being human, and like formally accepting that. I think, instead of trying to diagnose it right away is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yes, I think especially letting yourself stay in bed and cry all day and being right about it. Like there's no shame around doing that. There's really not. It's just like the layers of shame that we add on top of that, like, why am I here doing this? I shouldn't be here doing this. Stuff like that makes it really heavy.
Yeah.
But if you just own it, watch, you'll lay in bed all day and you'll cry, and you'll come out on the other side, like born out of the covers, brand new again. Yeah. I had so many days like that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it happens. Like it just happens. And you think you want to die and you think you don't want to live anymore. And you think it's just, and then you find hope. And then you want
Yeah,
to do
all
it
of
all
that.
again. And you're like, whoa,
Exactly.
where did that all that, and it's just part of the cycles.
It is, yeah. And allowing, being in total allowance of all of the feelings that are coming up.
Yeah.
Being in total allowance to, just like what you said, I think I had those words on my lips at times. Like, I just don't want to do it today. I don't want to do life. I don't want to live through this day. And
right.
If you can just allow that, it moves through. Like those feelings, they just want to cycle. And sometimes it was like the words that come up, it's like, it's not even my words. These are words that I've heard my mother say.
Right.
Or these are probably ancestral, like passed down through DNA, and they just want to come through, and they just want to be heard and seen and acknowledged and noticed and recognized.
Yeah. And it's
before
also,
they can complete.
Right. And I do believe that it's an identity crisis. And I think that we live in a society that's very invested in identity. Personally, I don't believe in identity in the same way. I believe that identity changes and flows and, is extremely, flexible. So as a result, like, I don't practice identity politics. I don't think people can be judged by their sexuality or their ethnicity or their skin color or whatever, their gender or anything, or their zodiac or whatever. But what I'm saying is, if when you're in that dark depression, you can divorce yourself from your identity, you're no longer in it. So it's inevitably always a crisis of identity, rather than of you, of the living essential human you. It's very much a crisis of your social identity. Like, I'm just not, good enough to be who I said I am. But that means nothing. That's just like the goddamn title that you were given or picked up on, and how you seem to be judging at the moment.
Absolutely.
But it's not your human essence. It's definitely not. When you find yourself, if you can get out of your identity completely and be in sit by the ocean somewhere far away where you don't speak the language, and just be there for a while, the burden will lift. Just, so it's that thing. It's going back to that presumed identity that's where, the judgment, occurs.
That's what hurts, for sure. My teacher says that hearts don't actually break. Hearts don't break. It's the ego that breaks.
Yeah.
And that hearts are extremely flexible.
Yeah.
And it's just our ego, it's our identity that breaks, and that's what hurts.
Yeah, exactly. Whoa.
Yeah. Mind blown.
I think we're good.
Yeah. I think we're good.
It's not going anywhere. It's going to be out there. It reaches people, people keep listening to episodes from years past. It's just, it's there for those who need it.
Beautiful.
So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for being with us. And until next week, keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.